Thank you. It's better than being a hobbit, I suppose. Look, thank you for coming along here this morning on this wonderful Melbourne morning. And he's from Scotland. What would he know about cold? And you've warmed them up in terms of getting your accent quite familiar. And certainly, it's the first time I've met Tom this morning, but having followed what he's been doing over the last few years in building an organisation like researchED, it's really pretty damned obvious that evidence is what should make the difference in every one of our classrooms. And so the fact that an organisation like this exists is a real statement. And you know the story. I meet with politicians, you meet with politicians. They all have research. They all have evidence. They all have theories about what they do. And similarly, when you talk to teachers, every single one of you, put your hand up, has evidence to support what you do. And every parent who walks through the door of schools like this, they will tell you how you should run your classrooms in your school. And they have evidence. Surely, evidence should be the most hotly contested word in our business. And if you think of research, research, we're searching again. And that's what a lot of the research activity is. Going back over the many things we know, the many things we've found out, and trying to build a story about them. And this is what sometimes we forget when we talk about evidence. Evidence isn't facts, it isn't data. It's the interpretation of that data. And I could bring a mound of papers here today and make you sit here today and read them all. And every single one of you would have a different interpretation. And so I see evidence very much as not being fickle. Can we get it synchronized so what I see here is up there? Thank you. I'm sure that I'm sitting here watching this screen and it's perfect for me. We're getting there. Oh, here we go. So what the next screen shows, which you can't see, is this notion of research and the various kinds of notions of evidence. And there's evidence from unbelievable controlled studies. Now, we don't have in our discipline the notion of controlled studies. There are some, that's for sure, but it's just not the nature that we have laboratories and we bring kids out of schools and put them in laboratories. That just doesn't quite work for us in the same way. Oh, you're magic, thank you. It is the case that people are arguing for that, and I see a great place for it. But there's also the research from your observations. Plus, of course, there's evidence from your past experience. So that's the one that teachers use the most. I have been teaching for 20 years. This has worked for me for 20 years, and this is why I keep doing it. And that is evidence. The question I want to raise is, how do we contest that evidence? How do we contest it in a way that we build a narrative? And so when I ask you all to look at this picture, what do you see?
Ahmed Ablam.
Say again?
Ahmed
Ablam, well done. What do you see?
Flags.
Flags coming out, yeah. Others? A mountain, yeah. If you're a photographer, you might say it's a bit fuzzy. If you're into Tibetan religion, you might look at the stupa. And my point is, every one of you sees something different, but the mountain doesn't change. And this is one of the problems of research. We can look at all the same classrooms, but it's that lens that we have on, that interpretation we have on about that evidence that makes the difference. And then, believe it or not, teachers are humans. And like all humans, We have lenses. Often we see so much information around us, and therefore as humans we're often drawn to details that confirm our existing beliefs. And hey, I'm a parent. I am very good at that. My kids do things, it's what I told them to do. When they do things well, and when they don't do things well, they're violating my principles. The world fits my world. And this is one of the problems that we have to worry about in this evidence-based world. Are we prepared to see that mountain in different ways? And as critically, are we prepared to falsify our beliefs about what we see? Do we look for the evidence about what's not working? Because that's the essence of this business. Also, as humans, we know what other people are thinking. We often project what we see onto others. And one of my pet dislikes in this business is this world called best practice, where teachers get up and say, or schools get up and say, look, this is what we do. And away they go. But it misses the point. It's got nothing to do with that. It's to do with this. How did that teacher interpret, make decisions, change what they did on the fly about that? And I'm at the stage where I hope none of you ever go to a professional learning session and give up a Saturday to go and look and learn about another app, another resource, another teaching method. I could not care less how you teach. I care about the impact of your teaching, and I care about how you think about your teaching. Hard to see. But it's those decisions you make. Whereas we are invested with a world of things. In fact, I don't know about you, Tom, but I get 3 or 4 emails a day from around the world with people wanting me to endorse some app, some resource, or here's this latest book I've written about what I do. Oh my goodness. I have two questions. I ask, has this been implemented in any other classroom, any other school? And have you got any evidence that it changes the learning lives of kids? And 99.9% of them disappear. People love creating things and say this is evidence. You're going to hear me argue that's not. And the third thing is we need to act fast, particularly in classrooms. And all of you know it's incoming, it's incoming, it's incoming. And all of you remember those first year of teaching when about week 3 you realise, oh my gosh, it never stops. And we do make quick decisions, sometimes simple decisions, sometimes decisions that confirm our worldview, even if our worldview hasn't really got an evidence base. And so, what I decided to do was to say, there's no such thing as immaculate perception. We can't all see those research studies in the same way. And certainly for me, it took me 20 odd years to plough through the work that I've been doing to try and create the story based on the evidence. And so what I've done, as some of you know, is spent a lot of time trying to harness that evidence from that research base. Now let me talk about that research base. As I said at the beginning, it's not controlled studies. Yes, there are some. Nearly all of it is based on what happens in regular classrooms by regular teachers around the world. The majority of the work, nearly all of the work, 99+% of it, is based on classrooms run by ordinary teachers. Not like in psychology where they use undergraduate students, they bring outsiders in, this kind of stuff. And so I would argue we know a fair bit. In some ways, if we decided to stop tomorrow collecting any more data in this field of education, it might be a good thing. Whilst we mine and try and understand what we have. And where I've been at is trying to ask this question. And I've specifically looked at the achievement question. Yes, there's oodles of other things we do in schools besides enhancing kids' learning around achievement. Yes, there's a group in Germany that I'm working with over the last 3 or 4 years. We're still going, looking at doing the same kind of thing I'm going to talk about this morning, but they're looking at effective and motivational outcomes. David Mitchell wrote a book a couple of years ago, same as what I did, but he did it with special education kids. Yes, we've got a project going with my partner over the last 10 years. We've probably got 10 years to go because of the lack of data at the moment on nutritional and physical health education outcomes. And we could go on and do other outcomes. The one that I'm most passionate about is the hardest to collect data on. Hank Levin, economist of education, he showed that the best predictor of health, wealth and happiness amongst adults is not achievement at school. It's the number of years of schooling. So to what degree are our schools inviting places for kids to want to come back to? And notice I deliberately say that. I'm not a fan of raising the school leaving age because you just keep kids who don't want to be there in the school longer. I want to turn it on its head and say, to what degree do we keep kids wanting to come back to our school? And I would say the biggest crisis in Australia, and this is my pitch to the new Gonski 2 when it comes out, get the right problems on the table. The biggest problem in this country is when you look at the percentage of kids who start high school that don't finish high school, in Australia it's 76%. 1 in 5, 1 in 4 kids start high school, don't finish. When I then look at Victoria, 97% of adults in prison in Victoria did not finish high school. The cost to them, cost to society is huge. Our schools aren't very inviting places to kids to want to come back to when 1 in 4, 1 in 5 don't make it and are doomed in terms of many of their opportunities in the future. And so that should be behind the table. But today, I'm going to keep to the achievement and I make no excuses. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to say, could I actually try and understand why it is that everybody in this room, everybody in this society knows how to fix schools, don't you? You know the answers. Now a lot of it's do it my way. Just watch me. And when I first started in this business, I perhaps shouldn't confess this, but my background, my whole academic career, I'm a statistician, I'm a measurement person. Psychometrics is my thing, I love it. And when I started, I was told, yeah, you're kind of okay, but. And each of my fellow colleagues up in New England took me aside, and each one of them said, if you're going to really make a difference, you're going to have to study. And the first person told me, the future is in IT. The next person said, the future is in how you communicate. Next one, curriculum. And away they went. And everybody told me that the future was what they were doing. And then teacher education, wow. You know the story. They come out of the universities, they come to your classes, you say, oh, nicely, forget all that stuff you learned there. Just watch me. And you're all different. And then you read the research articles. Wow, thousands of articles a year we publish. Nearly all of them claiming that what we studied worked and just give us more money so we can keep studying it. But I bet if you come to researchED conferences, everyone's going to get up and say, this is what works. How come we've got a business of what works? How come every one of you here knows in your classroom what works? Tom, I want you to change your title. I think what works is a bankrupt notion. And I want to show you why. Because I wanted to change it around and say, could I put everything out there, the tens of thousands of studies, on this continuum, so you can identify what's down here, don't want it. Oh, in the middle, no way. We don't want to have a zero impact on kids. And what worries up here? So I wanted to change the question to what works best. And then I needed the data. Well, I've got oodles of data. I've got oodles of influences. And here's some of them. Now have a look at those. Which of those do you think have great impacts on kids? Now for each of those, I've got thousands of studies. In many cases, hundreds of thousands of kids, given the way I've been doing this. So tell your neighbour, convince yourself, which one or two do you think really make the difference.
I don't think it is.
Yeah, I like
All right, it's the Eddie McGuire moment. Have we locked in your answers? Because the answer, guys, is not one of them. They are trivial differences, as you're going to see. They are hardly walking over the road for, and they're certainly not worth getting up and giving up a Saturday morning. But I put to you that the majority of things on that chart are what we talk about in the public arena, what we talk about in the parent evening nights, and what we talk about in the staff rooms. Why is it we love to talk about the things that don't matter? How come we've got a massive politics of distraction? And I bet if I went and stood at the gates of this school, or any school, at 3 o'clock in an afternoon, and the parents were talking, once they got over the sport and the other things that go on, these would be the dominant debates. And as you're going to see, they are trivial effects. And it's how you can actually get that comparator between what works best and what doesn't work. So where I'm at, and I keep flowering away, is I'm up to 14,000 meta-studies. And what a meta-study is a person goes out and studies, for instance, the effect of finances on kids' learning. One study. Another person goes out and looks at it from a different angle. Well, I collect all those. And on finances, I have around 600 or 700 studies. I've collected them. And I sit on top of all those, and given I'm a statistician, it's pretty simple to be able to merge them together to come up with an estimate on average. Now, of course, you might say, oh, but it depends whether that money is, whether the study is done in Canada or whether it's done in Scotland or whether it's done in Australia. Of course it matters whether it's about primary schools and secondary schools and so on and so forth. And they are important considerations. And we also look at that. And so overall, we get an estimate. And so I've now got close to 80,000 studies. I've got 250 million students. Not a bad sample size. And collecting the data is actually quite easy. It's just squirrel work. This is why I like getting on those planes. Like yesterday, stupidly, unbelievably, I flew to Perth and back in one day for a 1-hour session to meet the minister. And so I sit on that plane and I code studies. Oh, it's exciting. Much better than movies. And why? The reason I code studies, because if you know the visible learning work, when I published it in 2009, there's 800 of these things, is I'm continually worried that the interpretation that I've built is wrong. What if someone came out with a meta-analysis that showed the effect of finance is dramatic? Then my story's going to be wrong. And my point I'm making is I am always looking for evidence to falsify my model. And that's not often what we do in classrooms. We find evidence to support our model, even if our model is wrong. There's always 1 or 2 kids that learn given the way we teach. There's always in a school 1 or 2 teachers minimum who are brilliant. And we say because of that we're doing the right thing. But what about the falsifiability? What about when it's not working? And so when I look across and I keep adding to the studies, overall I get a distribution like this. And this is what I think is fascinating. Is across all the studies, look at the red zone. These are the influences that have a 0 to negative impact on kids. And my best news for you here this morning is there's not much you do to kids that harm them. Isn't that good news? And some of those down there in that red zone make perfect sense. Like the effect size of bullying on achievement is about -0.3. The effect size of boredom on achievement is -0.5. Perfectly sensible. And when you take those into account, 95 to 97% of things we do to kids enhances their learning. all you need to enhance learning is a pulse. And this is, Tom, is why I don't like what works. Everything works. And it's killing us. And some of you may know I have a political job. I joined the dark side a few years ago. And I'm the chair of AITSL, the Australian Institute for Teaching and Learning Standards. And believe it or not, don't tell anybody this, it's owned by the federal government. I don't know if you know much about AITSL, Tom, but it's been around now about 7 or 8 years. And 97%, 95 to 97% of teachers and principals go to the AITSL website at least once a month. Resources are stunning. The teachers think they own it. I want to keep it that way too. But in our strange federal-state relationship, the federal government only owns one organisation in education, this one. And so I'm the Prime Minister's appointee as the chair of it. We set up a board, we do our stuff, we get letters of instructions to do things, and our constant mission is to help and resource teachers and principals make a difference to their day job. And I hope that you find it very useful, and if you don't, I hope you tell me how you can make it more useful. But one of the other consequences of having that role is I do get to meet all the ministers, and they do change often, and their Director Generals, hence a trip out to Perth yesterday to meet the new minister out there. And every one of them knows the answer. And of course, they're different. And every one of them wants to tell me and give me the pile of evidence, because they know what works. And that's what's killing us. Because if you look at that distribution there, look at the blue zone. The average is 0.4. The numbers don't matter today, the relativity matters. Look at the 0.4. Let me give you some meat behind what that 0.4 means. Ignore what I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes. Ignore the visible learning stuff. Let me ask a different question. If I was using the effect sizes, the numbers there, to say, what's the typical growth a kid makes from 1 year to the next, overall? And so what I did is I took all the data from NAPLAN over the last 8 years. I took all the data from SATS over the last 10 or so years. I took all the data from No Child Left Behind across the 50 states in the US. I took all the data from the ASTOL tool in New Zealand. So I've got a lot of many millions of kids. And when I asked that question, what's the typical growth for every one of those countries, for every year, it was exactly, to the decimal point, the same number. On average, it was exactly 0.4. Perhaps no surprise given I've got 300 million when you compare it. Two different sets of data. But what that means is teachers in schools that are in the blue zone, their kids are growing and gaining more than a year's growth for a year's input. And I think that's pretty impressive. But those in the yellow zone are not. And look at the blue zone. On the basis of my work, and also the basis of the work from NAPLAN and other kinds of data that we have in Australia, PISA, I can say with a reasonable amount of confidence that in this country, 60 to 70% of teachers and schools are in the blue zone. Excellence is all around us. And my mission, both as an academic and political, is to recognise that expertise that underlies that blue zone. As I said it to the minister yesterday, I said it to every single one of them. In the term of your office, I want it to be a badge of courage and honour that you never go to Finland, Singapore or Hong Kong. Have you got the courage to reliably identify the schools in your own electorate and state that are in that blue zone, and the teachers in that blue zone, and learn from them? Have you got the courage to reliably identify the teachers and the schools in the blue zone where their kids, on average, are gaining more than a year's growth for a year's input, and form a coalition of success around them, and then invite those in the yellow zone to join? That's all the visible learning story is. And I have to say, there's not a lot of courage out there in some places. And where it is, it can be tough. And one of your biggest resistance are your parents, often. Some of you may have, any of you watched the Revolution School last year? Yeah. There's a television program here of a school, not far from here actually, Canberra, where it was in the bottom 10% 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's in the top 10% across the state on any measure. And they followed through. Television was in that school, 2 camera people every day for a whole year. Wow, can you imagine that in your school? And they filmed, and you saw what happened. And one of the things they did is they also did a survey. They took stuff from all this visible learning stuff, and they surveyed 1,000 adults. It was negatively correlated with the evidence. On average, parents want that most harm their kids. We have a lot of work in our profession to educate our parents about what success looks like. Because often they're the ones that oppose us. And so when you see that excellence all around you, it keeps me going. It's what we're in the business for. But my biggest fear is we're losing it. We love to think of that list I showed you earlier, of the things that don't matter, that are way down here. Way down here. All down there. But they dominate the airwaves. And how can we get, as you're going to see, expertise which dominates the blue zone back on the table? It's very, very hard. And sorry, teachers as a profession, school leaders, you're stunningly good at denying your expertise. Oh, the kids did the work. The parents helped. The resources were good. Well, the other one I often get is, how can I possibly do all the stuff you're going to talk about out there? I don't have the time. I haven't got the right resources. I've got too many kids in the class. The curriculum is crowded. Oh, the assessment dominates. Get over it. The teachers in that zone have the same time, the same kids, the same curriculum, the same assessment. It is about how they think that differs them from those teachers. And if I haven't sold you on the blue zone versus the yellow zone, parents in the room. You didn't ask this before. Any parents in the room? You can be a parent and a teacher. Yeah, parents in the room. Here's the test for you. Do you want your kid in the class with a teacher that gets in the blue zone or one down the corridor in the yellow zone? Easy. What I'm not going to do today is to go through each of these. I'm going to give you a smattering. Because what I want to do is build a story. Build a story about what's in that blue zone to that yellow zone. And that's what took me 15 to 20 years to write the book, to create that story. Now, every one of these has a meaning. Every one of these you should ask about the moderators. Does it make a difference with left-handed, right-handed, girls, boys, England, Australia, maths, music, etc. And every one of those stories is important. And in a couple of books that we've written, you can go to that detail. That's not the message today. It's to paint that picture. And you can see there, retention. Take a kid, end of the year, you say, make the kid do the year again. There's been unbelievable number of studies on that. It is probably one of the most systematically negative things we do to kids. If anybody has found a kid or groups of kids that are profiting from retention, please publish it. You'll be the first. And of the 300 odd studies that are in that particular summary that's up there, I know them quite intimately for no other reason than when I was living in the United States, I was an expert witness in a Supreme Court case. Not because 80% of the kids who are held back are boys, but in America, 80% of the kids who are held back are African American or Hispanic. The equity thing should disgust you. The achievement thing should horrify you. So why do you keep doing it? Now, on the one hand, this is going to shock Tom, so he better be closing his ear here. I think the days of evidence is over. We are in the days of implementing the evidence. We know retention is a failure. You said it yourself. We know learning styles is one of our most abject failures. How can we implement the right things? And when I go back and look at retention, as I've certainly done, and ask that question, why do we keep doing it? It turns out that with one exception, the parents don't want it. And that exception happens to be when they're 5 years old. Do you hold your kid back or not? And it's really interesting, in countries that have absurd policies, like, can you believe countries have policies where you get kids, they start school in the year they turn 5. So you've got one kid that starts at 5 years, 11 months, and 1 year at 5 year, 1 month. That's a sixth of their life difference. Can you believe countries like that? Yeah, we're living in one. Whereas in countries, and states like South Australia used to do this before they were told they weren't allowed to, where the kids start school the day they turn 5, they don't have this problem. When we have stupid policies, we get stupid decisions. Now the good news is, parents, that within 2 years you can't tell the difference with what year the kids started. And so my point on that is that while we have silly policies, we force parents to go through anguish unnecessarily. Kids don't want retention. It's the teachers. And listen to what they say. Look, I've had the kid for a year. If I had him for more time, I could fix him. You had him for a year and you failed. What that kid does not need is more of the same kind of teaching, more of the same kind of interaction, more of the same kind of activities. What that kid needs is different. And that's going to be the majority of claims that I'm going to make about things less than 0.4. Don't tell me, just give me more time, give me more resources, give me different context. They don't work. Stop them. We should stop investing in the majority of things below 0.4. We should stop arguing that they're going to make the difference. When, as you saw, there are so many things in that blue zone. There are so many teachers already doing those things in that blue zone. Biggest manufactured crisis that I know of is girls learn differently to boys. Girls achieve differently to boys. It's probably the most researched study of the lot. And you can see the difference is trivial. And you know why. The difference between boys is ginormous. The difference between girls is ginormous. The average difference is trivial. So when people tell you about boys and girls, they learn differently, they are different, listen for the ka-ching. There's no evidence for it. No, nothing against boys' schools. Just don't believe that it's because it's boys that makes the difference. It's good teaching that's in the blue zone that makes the difference. And it's the same good teaching that makes the difference for boys and for girls. And then we go back to the moderators I was talking about before. Do any of these make a difference, depending whether it's in Scotland or Australia, whether it's in physics or phys ed, music or maths, whether it's boys or girls, you name it. With a couple of exceptions, I can't find them. What works best for all. Now that doesn't mean that kids aren't different, of course they are. It means what makes the difference to each kid is very similar. And that's exactly what David Mitchell found in his work on special needs. What works best for them works best for all. Russell Bishop, what works best for Maori and minority kids works best for all. But sometimes what works best for all doesn't work best for Maori and special ed kids. It's often we have to assume things that kids can do. Whereas with special needs kids, you don't make assumptions anymore. As you're going to see, you are massively in control. And you can see, giving kids control over learning is as close to zero as you can get it. Now that, you be careful about that one. If I say to any student, whether it be you or a 5-year-old, you're in control of your learning, they'll keep doing what they can do. Surely the essence of good education is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. But that's a learned skill. And most kids, most humans who are given control of their learning don't take the challenge, don't take the risk, because if they did, they need expertise to help them, which is why you are there. Now I know as teachers you're smarter than that. You don't give kids control over their learning. You do what I do as a parent. You can do this or you can do that. Your choice. And this and that is well thought out. And yes, we want kids to have a sense of knowing what to do when they don't know what to do. Wow, absolutely. That's the whole self-regulation stuff that's going to come up very high. But that's a taught skill. And we have to teach those kids about how they can control where they go to next. Probably the one that worries me coming from your country, Scotland, something, from south of your country, and from the United States, is this fundamental belief that different kinds of schools will solve the problem. Charter schools, trust schools, academy schools. And when you look at all the different kinds of schools, here in Australia, religious schools, independent schools, makes virtually no difference at all. Take in Australia. If I take the NAPLAN results, and I ask the distribution of religious, independent, and state schools, with one difference, doesn't make a difference whatsoever. And that one difference is in the independent schools, they don't have many kids below average to start with. And so when you take that into account and compare them to schools, like government schools, like independent schools when they start, there is absolutely no difference. What a myth that we've had. What a myth that we've had that's been based on the assumption here in Australia that parents should choose the school for their kid. Now who could possibly be against that besides me? Like here in Melbourne, 60% of kids pass the local school to go to a school of the parents' choice. And it doesn't make one iota of a difference. And I struggle to understand why we've allowed this absurd debate that within school variance in Australia, take two kids of the same achievement, it does not matter what school they go to. All the variance is within the school. Now, for good reason, we don't allow parents to choose the teacher, even though some of us try. But that variance within school is our biggest issue in this country. Those teachers in the blue and the yellow zone are dispersed across schools. I just find it remarkable that we've allowed parents to have this debate. We've poured resources and money into that debate, and it's had a very perverse effect on us. We've spent billions on it, and it's no surprise that politicians are saying, we've given you enough money. And I'm trying to say to them, no, with respect, Minister, that's not quite true. It's not about how much money you give, it's how you spend it. And we need to be smarter at spending it, because we're going to go like every other Western country. The money in education is going to dry up dramatically. We're going to find alternative answers, and they aren't going to be expertise. Take teaching aids. Who couldn't possibly be against a teaching aid? Now, I haven't found the data for Australia yet, but I know in England and I know New Zealand, and I'd be sure it's the same in Australia. 20% of our salaries in schools now go to the amateurs, who have a zero to negative effect on kids. Peter Blanchard has done all this work. He goes further. He says a toxic effect on these kids. We love amateurism. Those kids are usually the kids that most need the experts, and we give them the amateurs. And we've allowed that debate to go on, and that debate is resources not being used for you. Now, I have to address class size. It's my pet hate one, because most people misunderstand it. Now, that effect size, based on over 1 million kids, over 100,000 teachers, typically comparing them between class sizes of 25 to 30, comparing to class sizes of 15 to 20. That effect size is 0.21. Now listen, reducing class size enhances achievement. And anyone who says to the contrary does not understand the evidence. That's what a plus 0.21 means. It's not zero. It's positive. The problem I have is firstly obvious. It's the 192 out of 250 who influences. The effect size is small. In fact, the only question in town is, why is it so tiny? I mean, for most of you, it's so obvious it should make a difference. My other problem, and the bigger problem, is the whole basis of this work, is that what we do is we say 0.21, yeah, smaller classes, compared to what the alternative is, larger classes and effect size in terms of comparing to the 0 point. It's like saying, what's the effect of me compared to not have me? What's the effect of this new intervention compared to not have this new intervention? Wrong comparison. It's the comparison of what works which is killing us. The right effect size is to say, what's the effect of class size compared to all the other things we would do to kids anyway, and you already know what that number is, it's 0.4. So relative to the things we do on average, class size is very, very tiny. So, come back. Put your research hat on. Accept the evidence for a moment, much as you may dislike it. Why is the effect of class size so small? Correct. Take a teacher in a class size of 25 to 30, put them in a class size of 15 to 20, and they do the same thing, who's surprised? And that's exactly what happens. In fact, in a class size of 25 to 30, most of us use a tell and practice model. I tell, you practice. And nothing wrong with it. It kind of works. We also know in classes, in fact we're doing this work at the moment, both in Australia but mainly in England, where we're doing a lot of work getting transcripts from teachers. As you're teaching, we can actually take a transcript from what you say and put it back on the kids' laptops or the iPhones or the whiteboard within 3 seconds. We can also give you, by the time you leave the classroom, a completely coded using a kind of Danielson-Mazzano kind of thing, instantly, reasonably automatically, at the same time. And if you're interested, you can download the app on Apple. I'm not selling anything because it's free. And we're trying to do this. And one of the questions we're asking, what percentage of the time per day do you talk? Well, yes, some of you are teachers. What percentage of the time do you talk?
85.
89.
85.
It's 89. Very close. I'm an academic. It's 100. We are good talkers. In smaller classes, we talk more. We ask between 150 and 250 questions a day. In smaller classes, we ask more. There is less group work in smaller classes. There is less feedback in smaller classes. Because we do what we do in larger classes, and we do more of it. It makes perfect sense. Now, if we retrained you to teach differently, like shut up, like get the kids to talk more, like to get kids to ask questions more, that effect may go up. There's only one study that's ever done that. Didn't work, not the point. It could make a difference. So could class size make a difference? Yes. Has it? No. And the majority of studies of those teachers in the blue zone aren't in smaller classes. And I'm sure, as you know, in the top 4 or 5 of the top 10 countries of the world in PISA, class sizes are more like 50 to 60. Not that I'm advocating that. Effect sizes are still positive. Can we get over class size? How many of you in the room are school leaders, principals? Put your hands up. Well, not many. How's it feel to be below average? Oh, 0.32. That's a bit of a worry. Now, my good friend Vivian Robinson, when I was working in Auckland, was very unhappy when I found this and showed her this. And if you know Vivian, when she's unhappy, she's very unhappy. I said, Vivian, it's not far away. So what she did is she went out and did her own study, her own meta-synthesis, looking at school leaders and principals. And she made this distinction between what she called the transformational leader. And when we do the Tallis studies around the world, including Australia, 85 to 90% of principals argue that they're inspirational, they set the vision, they worry about making sure that the staff are buffered from external pressures, that they have autonomy to teach. And she contrasted it with what she called her instructional leadership. The principal school leader that worries about the data, worries about classroom observations, these kind of things. The difference between them is chalk and cheese. Transformational leaders, get out of our schools. Look at the damage you're doing. All that stuff that came from business and CEO stuff. Yeah, it's easier to sit in your staff room and create the vision statement. Now, to be fair, to be an instructional leader, you probably have to be a good transformational leader first. But the message with principals, yes, they can make a difference. If they think and do things in a particular way. Let's get above 0.4. Once you start to see difference, Take all the structural things, the things about the structure of the curriculum, the structure of the classroom, the structure of the buildings. Not a single one of them is above 0.4. Virtually everything, not quite, but virtually everything above 0.4 is about teacher or school leader expertise. So you look down there, you see teacher expectations are in there. I want to come back to that. Asking why questions. I think it's fascinating. Those of you who've got 3-year-olds, what's the most common question your 3-year-old asks? Why? What's the most common question an 8-year-old asks? What? How come we've drummed the curiosity out of them and they think that being smart in school means knowing lots? And what we do is we do in our work. We go into schools and we ask kids, what does it mean to be a good learner in the school? And so often they say, a good learner comes to school, sits up straight, pays attention, gets their work done on time. Nothing to do with learning. Or in high schools, who's the best learner in this classroom? Oh, that person is. Why? Because they get it fast, they don't have to put in any effort, it comes to them easy. Hopeless, that is not good learning. They just know lots, but they don't ask the why question. As you can see as we go up this list, particularly the influence of peers. Kids learn an incredible amount from their peers. Unfortunately, they also learn a lot of wrong stuff from their peers. Our job is to make sure they learn the right stuff from their peers. Because it's very powerful. And it's no different in the staff room. What your peers say sometimes is much more important than the person up on stage. So you better make sure that what your peers says is the right stuff. And of course, teacher-student relationships are very powerful. And as we know in our work, in implementing this evidence in school, building that trust, building that relationship, it's the first step. And remember why it's the first step. If I don't got trust with you, you're not going to say to me, I don't know. I've made an error. Help me. And that's the essence of learning, surely. All learning is based on what you don't know. Errors are opportunities to learn. But what happens in your class if a kid doesn't make a mistake? No, they don't put their hand up. They say they do, but they don't. Most kids by age 8 know their place in the classroom, and they know that if they don't know, they just have to look like they don't know. And my number 2 son went right through his schooling, and we knew that despite the fact that the teachers thought he was a wonderful kid to have in the classroom, teacher's pet, every class he went to almost, we knew he went to school for lunch, sport and girls. And he got through just at the minimum, lazy brat. I think it's kind of ironical that was the first of my now 3 sons who have become teachers. I'm very proud that they've become teachers. I said to him, what are you going to do? He said, I'm not going to let them get away with what I got away with. But he learned, as many kids do, how to get below the radar when you don't know. Because let's get real, guys. If you don't know, it requires effort and work. It's like, Janet and I have been married 30 plus years. And if someone said to her, how come, or said to me, how come you survived 30 years with the one person? I am the world's best selective listener. I know how to not hear. Because I know if she tells me something and it's wrong and I have to do it again, I'll have to invest. And that's the same with 8-year-olds. They're smart at that. And so how you build that student relationship so you can use it. And I'm much more interested in what happens when mistakes are made in classrooms and when kids don't know than when they do know. As you can see here, as we go up this list, a lot of things about teaching kids how to learn. In fact, we've just finished a similar study that I'm talking about to you this morning. But this time our exercise is not related to achievement, it's related to how students learn. Very powerful. Goal difficulty. How can we bring the concept of challenge back into learning? Most kids up to about 11 or 12 will do what you ask them to do. After that, they want to be challenged. And so on as I get up to the story about exposing kids, showing them up front what success looks like before they do the task. How can you make the outcomes, the success criteria of the lesson clear to the kids? So the kids can invest in their learning to be successful. If you don't believe me, just watch them playing video games. They'll keep doing it again because they know what the criteria of success is. I know what it is because I'm a little obsessed with Angry Birds still. I know what success is. I know what I have to do to get there. And I also know when I get there, oh my gosh, not like teachers do. They say, well done, good work, go out and play. What does the video game say? And I just want to keep going and keep going. I want to invest in this thing called learning. I don't see the output as the product to hand in to the teacher to be marked. I see the success as the step to the next criteria and the next level of success. Teacher, 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 right throughout. That teacher expertise. And so let's go to the top lot. And the number one is the newish number one. And it's when principals, school leaders listen. It's when the adults in the school, the teachers in the school, collectively believe they can change the learning lives of every kid. Now, in some ways, I get a bit worried with the wording here, because sometimes people think it's just feeling good, rah-rah stuff. It's not. It's that collective efficacy, provided it's fed by the evidence of impact. So it's maintained. And it's all about that notion of what you understand impact is. Hence the catchphrase I keep using, know thy impact. How do the teachers in that school understand what a year's growth looks like? It should not be a random crapshoot that every time a kid hits a teacher, that kid goes up or down depending on that teacher's conception of what progress is. Because I can guarantee to you that teacher's conceptions of a year's growth is that, they will be successful. Whereas down the corridor, a teacher has a conception that a year's growth is that, they will be successful. And that is the difference between the yellow zone and the blue zone. That's the difference in the variance of teachers, their conception of what growth is. The biggest single issue in the teaching workforce in Australia is that teachers do not have a common conception of progress. And of course, as we do in our work, we confront that. And we're confronting the very essence of your professional being, your conception of growth. That says we need to do it collectively. That says that we need to help kids understand and build assessment capabilities of what progress means. And that's a job for us. That means that we use response to intervention. We put something in place. Start again. Response to intervention. We diagnose what the kid can and can't do. We put something in place, and then we evaluate it. Unfortunately, what we often do in education is we miss the first step. And we talk about, here are some interventions. Sometimes we say, oh, well, the interventions come from visible learning. It must be right. They're on the top of the chart. And sometimes those interventions don't match with the diagnosis. Beware of educators with solutions. They're everywhere. How do we get good diagnosis to know what the kid needs to learn next? So the interventions are appropriate. And so that if the intervention doesn't work, you have other interventions you can try. And you then evaluate whether they work relative to the diagnosis. And that's the clinical model that is so powerful and underlies this whole model here. And the power of feedback, the power of building up the efficacy. Now, it is the case that 50% of the variance in kids' learning is a function of the kid. Bright kids last year, bright kids next year. But we're not brain surgeons. We should surely accept every kid that crosses the door. The biggest source of variance that we have control over is amongst our teachers. And that variance within school, as I mentioned earlier, is relatively tiny. Unfortunately, it's increasing in Australia, which is a bit of a disaster for our country, because parents falsely believe, the government falsely believes, the funding falsely goes to variance between schools. It's how we invest in that expertise. And I'm not dissing teachers. You saw the data, 60 to 70%. The biggest single problem, I think, Tom, in the evidence business is we don't have a literature. We don't have a narrative about how to scale up success. We know what success looks like. The evidence is very clear. It's how do we get that 60 to 70% scale up to 100%. Is what it's all about. And the fundamental story is here. And you can see every one of those. And the story I'm trying to build in visible learning is about expertise. Every one of those is about a teacher or a principal and having expertise. And you can see those effect sizes relative to the ones we started with, dramatically different. You're talking about 2 to 3 years growth for a year's input when you do those things in the school. And don't get me wrong, there are many schools that are doing that now. We're in about 5,000 schools around the world with visible learning at the moment, and sometimes all we do is give permission to keep doing what you're doing. But if you're in the yellow zone, we say you have no right to autonomy. You have no right to continue what you're doing. You must change. And that's a hard battle. The other thing we also note is that the correlation between expertise and experience after 5 years is 0. Sometimes your 5-year-out teacher is in the blue zone and your 20-year-out teacher is in the yellow zone. Unfortunately, our schools are not structured that way. Our pay scale is not structured that way. So the message is, when teachers see learning through the eyes of students, as I said before, let's stop talking about teaching. I couldn't care less how you teach. I only care about the impact of your teaching. And yes, I'm going to use test scores. If I use that alone, I fail. Yes, I am going to listen to the students, and we use student voice a lot about their learning. Yes, we use artefacts of kids' work. Yes, we do classroom observation of the impact of the teacher to build up, helping teachers see. Like 80% of what happens in your classroom, you don't see or hear. Which is why I've got no time for that teacher reflection nonsense. Why would you reflect on the 20% you saw? How do we get more resources and aids into your classroom to help you see your impact? And we can do it. But we are doing it. And the bottom line, and we've got fancy words, self-regulation, metacognition, 21st century skills, lifelong learning. Nah, they're all important, but they all mean that. How do you get kids to become their own teachers? How do you get kids to know what to do when they don't know what to do? And I find it absolutely fascinating that 5-year-olds are brilliant at it. By age 8, they've learned that their job is to come to the classroom, sit up straight, and watch. And you were waiting for the battery to go, weren't you? Right, can you hear me?
Yes.
So their job is to come to classrooms and watch you work. Doesn't make sense. Let me comment before I go here. The one thing, it's about how you think. And yes, I've got 10 ways mind frames. But they all mean one. They're all just variants of the same thing. The biggest single factor in this business is this. If you walk into a classroom and you say, my job here today is to evaluate my impact. The kids are the beneficiaries. When you walk into a staff room and you say, my job here today is to evaluate my impact. Of course, it begs the moral purpose question. What do you mean by impact? Of course it helps if that's exposed to the kids or the teachers about what you mean by impact. What does success mean for you in the time you have? And in all our work, we spend a lot of time worrying about that sense of impact. Thank you very much. We want to get away from just high achievement, because high achievement's killing this country. And yes, of course, I also want high achievement, but alone it's killing us. Because what we do is we say, how does this school go in terms of its achievement level? Now, I could argue that what I want is progress. Am I getting that year's growth or a year's input? But also what I know is that when I talk to politicians, parents, principals, they agree. And then 2 minutes later they get up and say, we have to have high standards, we have to have kids. And NAPLAN comes out every year. We have to have kids up there in the high achievement zone. Oh no, they missed the point. So what I do now is I put the two together. And actually I label each of those quadrants. And I'm asking, for instance, in your school, your kids start high achievement, but you're not adding a year's growth, you're a cruising school. If you're down here, no one wants to be down here. Low growth, low achievement. What about over here? Kids are gaining more than a year's growth, but they probably started pretty low, so they're not above the national norm yet. I think that's pretty impressive. And of course, everyone wants to be up there. And my argument to each one of you in this room today is that you don't know which quadrant you're in, you may be doing incredible damage. Because how you get from here through to here or there to there is hugely different. And when I look at the figures here in Australia, this is the common debate I get. They're the good schools. No, they're not. Cruising schools are not good schools. Those are our best schools. So how can we get a narrative such that we don't kill our nation and we don't kill some of our best teachers and our best schools that are in this zone just because they don't get high above average achievement? And there are some stunning schools in that zone. Let me show you some data from Australia. Here's the data for the whole of NAPLAN high schools. And I've done it for everyone, they're all not the same. Hey, good news. Not a hang of a lot of schools down here. Good news. 60 to 70% of the schools, I would argue, are doing a stunning job. But look at the problem. The incredible number of cruising schools. In fact, we have more cruising schools and cruising kids than any other Western country in the world. And when I spoke last year to the Independent Schools Conference and said 3 times more independent schools are cruising than government schools, the reaction was, so? Our kids get good ATARs, they get to the university they want, parents are happy. You're killing our country, guys. We know in PISA that for the last 15, 20 years, we are going backwards. And Catherine Scott ran a seminar last year with probably the best title I've ever been to, Are We the World's Biggest Losers? And I had to get up and say, no, we're not, we're the world's 4th biggest loser. We're going backwards everywhere. And it's really important to realise why we're going backwards. 40% of our backwardness is explained by our above average top 40% of our kids. We are hopeless with them. We are stunningly good with these kids. You'd never know from a lot of our rhetoric. This is evidence-informed business. How do we get every one of our kids, no matter where they start, that at least at that year's growth? Can it be done? Let me show you. We've gone into one state in this country, 300 schools, virtually every school. We used that notion of teachers are to die for. Great diagnosis. So we go out, we ask the schools on kind of a traffic light, where do they fit in terms of their school climate, strategic planning, etc. We have a lot more than that. And the school, not the principal, the school then decides where they are. Just to give you a sense, you can't read this, it's quite a big set of data we ask for. And the other advantage of this, asking it up front, we have baseline data. So we actually do longitudinal analysis in the school, with the school. And in the whole of the Northern Territory, this is what it looked like 4 years ago. Not a pretty picture. And when I went up to the Territory 4 years ago and spoke at the only conference they had because of the expenses up there, the conference was about, well, what do you do? Oh, I do IT. Oh, I'm into building cells for going out in the desert with. I do this. And there was very little collective efficacy. Look what happened after we started introducing this focus, relentless focus on what does impact mean, what does progress mean, and looking at collective efficacy. After the first year. After the second year. I think that's pretty impressive evidence. It can be done. And when you went back to that conference after Impact Cycle 2, for the first time those principals were talking to each other about what impact meant. And you know what it's like up in the Territory. The average tenure of a teacher and a principal in the school is 8 months. That's the norm. Because they focused on learning, because they started building a community across their schools, across their internet, across their wirelesses, about a common narrative. It's no different in a school. That if you can focus your conversation in your school about the evidence and about the interpretation of that evidence, if you have the courage to reliably identify who's in that blue and that yellow zone, we can make dramatic differences. We can show our nation and those who fund us that we're pretty stunning at what we do. My worry is if we don't put that evidence on the table and we don't put how we interpret that evidence on the table, we're going to lose our business. Yes, it can be done. Evidence, not opinion, matters. And how do we get to that implementation? Thank you.
Good job.